Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Production Basics. This is webinar number 2 in the ABRN ATI education series. We will be covering the basics necessary to identify the workflow through the store, and that will help you build predictability into your production processes. My name is Keith Manich, and I am the Collision Director here at the Automotive Training Institute. Again, this webinar will cover the basics of collision center production and the need to develop comprehensive work plans that will allow for predictive production forecasting. It'll walk through determining the capabilities of the staff and how you compare productivity output to meet the financial needs of the store. Included will be stall to tech ratio, which is a very underutilized metric, floor plan capabilities, the measuring and validation practices, and capturing and communicating the results using the production floor visuals. So as we walk through this, we'll take these item by item, identifying production capabilities by the technician staffing. That's looking at what can the folks produce that you have working for you. Then the second part of this is the technician ratings. Where are they in the scale ranking as to their abilities? Number 3, measuring the efficiency. That's looking at the billable hours produced to the clock hours that are worked. And so that gives us the billable hours per day, per week, per month that they can produce. The stall to tech ratio, how efficient can they be, depending on the amount of stalls or vehicles that they have to work on. The staffing requirements by square footage, how many folks can we have in the production floor, and then setting those production goals. And if no management system is available, uh, there are process worksheets that can be used if you're a smaller store that doesn't have or has yet to purchase any kind of management software, so that you can, again, build predictability into your financial needs without having to have sophisticated tools to do it. So the staff level and competency will identify the level of production or billable hours that should be able to be accomplished. What does all that mean? What it means is I have a technician that I've rated at a certain level of competency, which means that person should be able to produce a specified amount of flat rate hours per day. So what we're going to do is look at their production capability and measure the frequency at which they can produce it. That gives us the ability to build a predictive model. This information is important so that the production manager can gauge the vehicle count and the requirements that will be needed to meet the financial goals of the store. So if you're in a very small store and maybe you've got either an estimator slash production manager or an owner slash production manager, whatever the case might be, it will give you the tools that will identify the frequency at which the cars have to come in and be completed so that we can meet the financial metrics. The typical ranking or competency is based on these certain things that we look at. So tasks, what are the specifics that we're looking for them to do? And then the training that's been completed, how well have they been trained to effectively meet the obligations of the tasks? And then the final thing is, have we viewed and validated that their work product can produce in the quality levels that we're looking for? So these levels will identify how many hours the technician should be able to produce, and again, daily, weekly, monthly, however, or whichever of those metrics you're using. Detailed task lists, then job descriptions should reinforce the performance expectations. So what do we mean by that? We take those tasks, we identify positively what they need to be doing. Then we say, okay, we're going to put that now into a job description. So the task list tells you kind of the what, and then we go into the job descriptions that tell you the who, why, when, and where. And so it gives us a kind of an overall process to use that we can develop measurements, and then we can hold folks accountable to those measurements. The A-rated technician or the A technician is typically described as the most skilled labor in the production environment. So they're your all-around person, typically welding certified, that can do all the requirements of any welding operations, structural measuring using three-dimensional measuring equipment, and so on. So you can split this off, and you really can have two different kinds of A techs, one with a structural direction and one with a not so much a non-structural but more of a finishing type. They're very quick at putting on closure panels and things like that that would be welded on, but they're not doing the actual structural pulling. So it's going to depend on how you rate those folks in your store as to what the expectation would be. But these, again, the definitive um, definition for them is going to be in the job description. No matter which of those things you assign the folks, it's going to give a detailed description with the accountability measurements that are going to be required for them. So each technician grade will specify the efficiency percentage that they should be able to achieve. So typically, when I get into that A technician, they're the ones that are going to be required to produce at the highest level of efficiency. Typically, with body techs, it's going to be, and it really depends on the store and in some cases the market, but tools, equipment, the training, all those things are part of this, but we're looking at anywhere from about 160 up through about 178 to 180% efficiency is typically what you look at that A technician. Now, if it's a painter, significantly higher, they're at about 200% efficiency. So for the A painter, so it really is going to depend on what level. As I start to come down, a B tech will be at 160% and so on. So it again, that's a max, but there will be a range for them as well as the C and the D tech or the helper. So the efficiency will translate into the hour production value daily. So it's going to be flat rate hours produced. That daily production labor hourly value is then added to the weekly goal for the technician. We multiply that throughout the shop and what the shop is doing, and it gives us what the production facility itself should be producing in hours. We multiply that times the rate to give us the dollar value. So the target hours are established by multiplying the daily clock hours times the efficiency percentage. So this is a very simple slide that shows production requirements. So it's going to give me the build hours that we're looking at to be produced, and then it's going to look at the efficiency hours of the techs. And so what I do on the left side is, as I go down through this, is my I may have multiple A techs. So the A tech, what is the required efficiency for this person? What does that mean in hours? Then I go down through all of them. I get to total tech hours. So that tells me what my requirement for the day is, and then or the efficiency requirement for the day. And then to the right of that, the hours. Why is this important? It's important because I need to know that as I go through my processes, we're going to talk about this several times throughout this program. I know, because of my fixed costs and all the things associated with production, that my folks need to produce, and I'll just throw a number out to you, say 350 hours a week. As I look at that, I know that those 350 hours are going to allow me to pay all the bills, make sure I make all the payroll, and make sure that there's enough profit for the store. So it's giving us a target that we're going to look at for the folks to be able to produce through the production environment. So we'll visit that again, but this is a very basic um, production requirement worksheet. So as we look at some of the parameters that we have set up for the technicians, the structural body technician, as I said earlier, about 175% if they're operating in good production environment with, again, tools, equipment, everything that supports it. We look at 14 to 14.4 hours a day. So that gives us roughly 70 hours a week that they should be able to produce. Now, I've had folks tell me, well, I have folks that are doing 100 hours a week. That's very possible. And typically that is a result of we have really well written blueprints and everything that is identifiable for the technician to be paid for is accounted for in those hours. So all of this still goes back to, although we're talking about production, part of production is going to be how thorough and complete is your blueprint. Does everything show up in the blueprint that the say technician's going to touch, and then are we billing it properly? So there are some other factors that are involved in here too. As we go down into to the paint department, down at the bottom, you see it says 200%, but you want to also add about another 40% additionally if you have a prepper that is a very well versed prepper that can help to get them to produce more labor hours. So again, I'm going to be looking at the different performance factors as we walk through the production environment. So again, if no management system is available, this is a worksheet that allows us to basically do the same types of calculations that the management system would provide. And the reason I'm showing this is we go through these programs and showing the worksheets versus the mechanized systems is there are still a significant number of shops out there that are using worksheet related type production tools, and it's important for us to recognize the fact that as we're going to build those stores up to the production value that will get them to be able to purchase things like a mechanized system, we still have to be able to do the measurements. And that's why I show you this, because the financial needs are still there for the store. We still need to know how to achieve them. So we have to be able to keep measurements to understand how we have to manage the business. There are various ways to schedule production, and it's important for us to understand that the schedule in the scheduling process, that there could potentially be production bottlenecks, and I'm going to talk about several different ways we look at those. But what I don't want to do is overschedule. That usually becomes a CSI issue for us. So if we overschedule, what does that mean? Well, if I'm only capable, I'll go back to what I said before, about 350 hours a week, and I'm scheduling 500, then we know I'm going to have 150 hours that I'm probably not going to touch. So if that in fact happens, what it means is I'm going to delay either somebody getting their car back or what I've developed for a predictive model for completion dates for the vehicles. And so it can create some issues for us even in the production environment before the car even gets inside the building. So we want to be establishing the production hours per day, as we said, but also what can we deliver per day? And then this focuses really on production or productivity of the technician, and that'll help ensure that the maximum amount of production can be accomplished. So we're looking at my particular folks, are they able to reach the goals that we've set for them? And that goes back to really the start of it is, have we shared with them what those goals are? Because the communication of those goals will typically help people to try and reach them a little bit more efficiently. So scheduling by hours versus dollars is the preferred method. I know I have some pushback on this by different folks throughout the industry, but I look at it this way. If I schedule by dollars, right now I've got headlights and other assemblies that are multi thousands of dollars where I can have a very small impact, but have a real high dollar amount of value to the repair plan or the estimate. So what happens is if I'm scheduling by dollars, I may short myself in the amount of labor that needs to be produced throughout the store for the technicians. So they're waiting for more work because they've gotten or they've completed work very quickly because the prices on the parts were high. And so I can have right now I can have a uh, $8,000 hit with two headlamps, a grill, and some front end work, and have minimal labor. So I've got to be really cautious about how I'm scheduling that work into the store. So the work that's coming into the store, the first thing I need to do, and this is in fact part of the production process, do we have an authorization for repair? And so when I look at that authorization of repair, real quickly, um, have I been authorized to do scanning? Have I been authorized to share that information if in fact it's requested from somewhere else? Those things should appear on your authorization uh, worksheet. If they don't, then you are kind of uh, caught in that discussion between the repairer and the insurer. um, am I going to get paid for scanning or not, and is scanning required, which we know it is, but is it going to be paid for? So let's get that done in the authorization of repair and share that with the insurer as the vehicle's coming in, if it's in fact an insurer related repair. One of the things that we look at here that I think is really important to balance what we have coming through the store is if we do have a speed lane, which is, some folks set up a place in the center of the store where they have three or four stalls that they can put in work that can get done very quickly. And then I have that 3,000 or $4,000 hit that just has the headlight and grill and maybe a bumper cover, things like that. I would put those in the speed lane. And so what we have to identify is how many of those can I do a day? Typically, we see those as 9 hours or less. And they're considered what we call 0 day cars. So now, if I balance that against the number of cars that take multiple days, it allows me to get that balance in my delivery times and my delivery dates, so that I can look at, here's my throughput number, and I have one extra vehicle that took 0 days, so it helps me balance that number out. So the other piece of this that's really important is work in progress, or work in process. More specifically, work that's been started. And I have labor and I have parts that have already been allocated against it. It's really important for me not to forget that that car needs to go, because one of the things we typically see is the tech wants the next car so that they can draw hours off of it, and we tend to kind of push the cars that aren't completed maybe to the back burner because we can get this one done really quickly. So what that does for the store is it impacts your cash flow. So again, as we're building our production schedule, we want to make sure that we've allocated enough time daily and weekly into the schedule to address those work in process cars. So, in understanding the scheduling, we're looking at, how we have to set up the week. So, can we schedule, throughout the week? And what I mean by that is, um, we still have a concern in the industry where we're working on the insurer's timetable, and that's Monday to Friday. And that means we only take in work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then, we're trying to get everything finished on Thursday and Friday, versus taking the work all the way through the week so that we can deliver each day throughout the following week. So we need to know what our flow of work is. Can we keep it consistent? And this helps us to improve our efficiency. So part of our production managers discussions are going to be, what are some of the things that we can do to keep that balance as we go through the week. The daily closure requirements, and it's not necessary that you get these closures per day, but we need those closure per day averages. um, If you say that you want to get 3, 5, 10, whatever your schedule will allow you to do, vehicles closed per day, we need to be monitoring that. Your production manager needs to monitor that to make sure that we're getting as close as we can to that goal, so that we can keep our weekly closures proper, so that we can make our monthly requirements. So again, it's important to understand how we have to bring the cars in, and what our closure requirements should be. So if I have a 5-day week, I want to bring close 15 cars that day. It gives me a target of 3 cars per day, and that's going to be the target that you would look to complete. So and then if you get those 3 cars per day, we can bring in the next group of cars that comes in behind it. And then if we have inventoried cars out in the parking lot, we can start looking at, if we get things done quicker, I can bring in one of the inventoried vehicles out in the lot. But I just don't want the inventoried vehicles to be so high that there's just no way I can get them into production in a timely fashion. Statistically, the fact that the further out we schedule the work, really there's a high probability that we're going to lose that work to competitors. I have folks that pride themselves on having the ability to keep work scheduled 6 weeks out. They've got lots of inventory. They got lots of folks wanting to come to their store. The only problem with that is you start to lose those vehicles that are scheduled that far out. Somebody needs their vehicle for whatever reason, and they have to get it done. They're going to find somebody who can get it done quicker than you can. And unfortunately, in some cases, they're making choices to shops that can't perform the work as well as you can. So the customers then put in an even more awkward position because the quality of the work isn't there. So we want to, make, if I have work scheduled that far out and I have the room in my facility to bring in another technician, that might be something I want to explore. And we'll talk more about that when we look at the stall to tech ratio. But there's comfort in knowing that the work is out there, but it's just making sure that we can get it in a timely fashion. So capacity and improving and developing that schedule includes bringing the vehicles in through the week, Monday through Friday. So one of the things that's kind of important here is, if you've got a relationship with any of the rental car agencies, if there's ability to get a better rate for the customer on a weekend, which in most metro markets is not too difficult to do, you may be able to kind of arrange that lesser rental cost, so that the insurance companies aren't so uh, set against not having that vehicle in over the weekend. The worst thing we have is when cars are coming in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The painters are going crazy Wednesday and Thursday. Everybody's putting together everything on Friday. Monday and Tuesday come along, and the painters have very little work to do. And so that's what happens when we keep going through that scheduling process and not considering bringing vehicles in throughout the week. So we want to make sure that we're aware that our timing and arranging those rentals, some markets, and I had somebody say, "Wow, I've never seen it that low," but I had it verified this past week that there are still some markets where you can get those weekend cars for $9.99 a day. Now, I don't know if that's going to be your market or not, but at least explore the possibilities to see what you can do to get a reduced rate, so that maybe we can get those cars scheduled in, so that we can hold them over the weekend to work on Monday and Tuesday. So as we go through this, we're trying to drive this production behavior. One of the things that you'll see in most all of the presentations that we do in the ABRN and AMI process here, we're going to look at standard operating procedures. The clearer we can define what we're asking people to do, the more apt they are to be able to perform to those requirements. So we're going to create, then we're going to communicate the measurements, and then we're going to use any kind of production visuals that we can that help the technicians, help the production folks understand here's the goal, here's what I've been assigned, here's where I am in looking at my goal. And then the other thing that we don't think about very much is how many hours work in process do I have? So what is that work kind of at the back in the back of my mind that I know that I've got to get to, but I want to get on some new jobs too. So we've got to have again balance. So one of the things that allows us to kind of communicate all of this is the release meetings. And so I don't know how many of you are conducting release meetings, but they are extremely important. And we find that shops that perform, and it's typically two meetings. One in the morning, that's a release out to the floor, takes about 15 minutes. And then we have one later in the afternoon, just after everyone comes back from lunch, that tells us, what else do we need? I'm going to explain them in more detail in a minute. That helps us to communicate effectively. Communicating effectively means that everybody understands exactly what the processes are, what the intent is, and what the result we're looking for is. So, with that, we look at the technician efficiency worksheets, which basically give for each technician. I want to know overall what I want the store to produce, but it's important for me to understand what each technician can produce into that mix. And so then with that, we have the production, the status boards that we have out on the floor. So, and I know it's difficult for you to read this, and if anyone ever has any questions about it, they can contact me directly. But we start looking at what are the step-by-step production processes that we have to follow. So we're going to list in order. You typically don't want SOPs to be longer than a page, but in some cases you have to go over. But you just don't want them to be extremely long documents. They need to be what specifically are we looking to do? What's the order we have to do it in? And then what will allow us to meet the requirement? Those are the three things that are typically listed. So the first thing we'll list is what's the name of what you're trying to get done. The second one is very generally what it is. And then the third column on the right is going to be what's the detail that's going to be required to get it done. Now, some of these go deeper that we may have step one in process one, but there's more information that goes behind it. Now, here's the idea behind this. Let's say the production manager, for some reason, has to be gone this afternoon, and I have somebody who's working through a specific process. They can go to the operations manual in the store, look at the production steps, and they can basically walk themselves through the process without having to get the detail from the production manager. So that's the idea behind these SOPs. Is it's very specifically what, when, and how things have to get done, and then these, as they're put in order in your manual, tell you the order in which they have to get done. And it allows us to come to the conclusion at the end of this. The conclusion is everything was done in specific order and completed the way it needs to be completed. This is another SOP that is basically for the incoming work, and it allows us to identify what's my scheduling process. So it establishes my goals. It helps us to identify as we walk through this what our WIP is, which is work in process, and then identify again the daily production requirements. So this tells me what cars do I need to have come in and when, what are some of the sizes of the jobs that I'm looking to bring in, and how can I accurately fill the needs of the production floor so that we can maximize our production. So again, that's really important in this because it's not just getting a bunch of cars in the door, because I can get all kinds of cars in the door, have the shop full, but if I can't get to any of them and they're not being completed, I'm not making any money because nothing's being closed. So we want to have a good ratio of cars into cars closed. This is the supplement processes for what we're trying to do is two things here. We want to avoid supplements whenever possible. So as we're getting into this production process, the first thing we want to do is make sure that that disassembly and repair planning process is very precise. So there are SOPs developed specifically for that. Then are we using things like either parts carts, or are we using totes, some kind of organizational steps in working through our parts processes? The number one stoppage in the production environment is for parts. So, what can we do to avoid those kinds of processes from, or things from keeping our processes from being completed without any kind of stoppage, or at least at a minimum of stoppages? And then developing the long-term strategies for identifying basically everything that's required for the repairs. So I want to be able to say that, if we keep our processes at a certain pace and we continue to move through these processes at this pace, I can predict pretty cleanly that at the end of the month we'll be at here on our financials, or at the end of the quarter, or at the end of the half year or year. So it allows us to build that predictability in, which is what we're trying to do. So the SOPs help us to stay so that our processes are predictable. And this one here is the incoming work scheduling. So these are things that we don't really think about in production, but they impact production. What are your administrative processes? Is all the paperwork right? Has the vehicle been reviewed? The repair planning itself, has that been completed properly so that all the things that need to be identified, so that when the technician starts to touch the vehicle, all of the things that are going to be required for the repair are in their scope of repair so that they can use them? And then again, the parts ordering processes, that all has to occur before the car comes in. So we need to make sure that all the verification, mirror matching, all that is done. And that's what we keep in these SOPs to, again, make sure that we can build more predictability into the process. Then this is an operational SOP that looks at, when I get those parts in, what are the things that I need to do with those parts to make sure that the technician, that the person ordering the parts, that the production manager all know if there's any issues. Obviously, when we get the part in, immediately, if we know it's a wrong part and it's not going to stop the process, we have to order it and get it in as quickly as possible. Here's what I try to communicate to everybody about your production steps. We can order the parts, all that stuff, that's great, and we can get the parts coming in, but each one of those parts orders, whether we know it or not, there's a lot of steps that are required. There's a cost associated with that. And so if we get all the parts ordered and we've done a really good job with the repair planning, we only do that once, and that means our cost to obtain the parts is less. Not that we're paying anybody, but we've got to absorb it into the labor within the store that's required to make sure that the order is complete. And we're not having to come back to that multiple times and do that again multiple times, adding additional cost, and then creating a stoppage out in the workflow, out in the production floor. Here's another one that we have for you, that's another important factor here is, what are we doing in preparing a car for paint? Where does paint begin? And so we look at, up to 150 grit is body, and then after that is going to be paint. And between body and paint, we've also got the steps of feather edge, block, and prime on all of our judgment time repair items. And a couple things there is, do the insurance companies even acknowledge that it needs to be done? One, and number two, it needs to be a paint operation because it requires primer. So those are some of the things that we discuss in this SOP. And then behind this would be, what's the supporting documentation that goes with this that we would use with an insurer who may push back on feather edge, block, and prime, as a for instance. So what are the preparation steps? If we have OEM or paint manufacturer installation steps or warranty requirements that need to be done. All those are put behind this SOP so that we have a complete set of documents when we go to talk with anybody who may be concerned about what we're charging on a particular repair plan. Now, the release meetings, again, I'll go back to what I said a little bit ago, that conducting the release meetings, it's really gotten to the point where it's essential in developing, and here's a word that we don't typically use in collision repair, we're developing a culture that is production oriented. And so culture means that I've got folks that they're thinking of things exactly the same way as the production manager, as the owner of the store. Everybody's aligned. That's where we build a culture. So we want to build a culture of inclusion. So what that means is I want the people who are actually executing the tasks, they need to be part of the process of developing developing the process. They've got to be there to help us to understand, what are the things that they feel are essential in their processes, and what do we need to do to be able to deliver on either the promise to the customer or the kind of the internal promise of when we're going to get the vehicle done. So two things that we talk about here is we need to be consistent in how we do all of these things, and we need to build repeatable processes. We don't want it so that the processes are different each time. It makes it much, much more difficult for us to build a culture if it's a moving target that the folks are trying to hit. So we want to deliver the same message, the same way, the same time. And if we're doing 8 o'clock meetings and everybody's told 8 o'clock is when you're going to get your job assignments, 8 o'clock is when we're going to update you on everything we're working on, you're setting the expectation that your culture is going to be changed to 8 o'clock meetings, 8:15 release, everybody goes to work, and everybody understands that that is what your process and what their roles are in helping to maintain that process. The administrative staff also has their own meeting, which is typically done before the release meeting out to the staff. And what this one does is it identifies any issues that we may have on any of the vehicles that we're working on. And the important one is the third bullet down where it says identify any special circumstances. Is there anything in particular that that particular customer wanted done to their vehicle that we absolutely make sure gets done? Or if there's additional work that they've wanted to order up and we've got a second estimate on, those are the kind of things that are special circumstance items. And then we want to make sure that we're creating an environment where the production staff can meet any of the requirements that are set out there by our customers. The administrative staff meeting should be, again, completed just prior to the production meeting. That will determine our order of repairs. So it's going to tell us what vehicles have to come in that day, who's going to do them. And again, identify any special circumstances which have to be addressed so that if it's going to take longer than what's on the initial repair plan, we can identify that. Because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get to what are we going to be able to complete per day, per week, and then of course monthly on what should our throughput be able to produce in total sales for the store. So these are directions that basically walk through that process of setting the goal hours, identifying who needs to do what repair orders are going to be completed when, and that may be they may be scheduled throughout the week. That I've got particular cars that I want to come in at particular times. It's going to go through what our availability of the technicians are and who can produce what, and then who is going to be able to complete the flagged hours in accordance with whatever we determine to be the process for them, and then how are we working our WIP. So again, these are the directions that we use for productivity worksheets. these are something that I provide out to stores I work with because it's really important. Just kind of list it all down just so you have a general idea of what you want going through when. This is another productivity model. This one's from AXO. It's very nice, color coded. It's got all kinds of different ways you can work this. It's on the right side there. You'll see a color key. The thing I like about this system that's done on a smart TV, the technicians can even clock in and off the jobs right on the TV. They can go up and click time clock and they can go in and do everything on it. So, but again, this is sophisticated, if you will. Um, it may be not sophisticated to those who use a lot of electronics, but to a smaller store, this is of the scale that maybe they're not going to be able to use. So some of those things I showed you previously are going to be things that we would use to kind of hand calculate those. But I tell you, even when you're using something like this, as we're completing our estimating or repair planning during the week, we still have to identify when we want those cars to come in. Then we're going to throw them into the schedule. And so it's really important just to have a general idea of how those things work so that we can better apply that to our production processes. Here's another view of that. And again, they're really nice tools. This one, because they're using, in this particular one, it's 74-inch screens. So it's a big board that they can put up, and it's just like having a production board that we would keep by hand, but this is all mechanized and they can clock in and clock in and off the jobs on these as well. So again, it tells us where we are in the processes so that production manager with one look at this understands exactly what he's got to maybe put one person on one thing and maybe another person on another to speed the processes up, and this board would allow them the flexibility to do that. Another thing that we need to look at within the store is kind of this is a location diagram within the store, but in the production area, what's going to go where, and how quickly can we get vehicles through the store. So um, one of the things that I know lots of consultants look at when they're working with your store is what makes the most sense about your store layout, and how can we get the most vehicles into the store with the ability to have room to work on them, and then have a workflow that allows us to move the vehicles through, so that we're not getting those log jams, if you will, as we go through this. So um, targeting the number of vehicles that can be produced per day or per week, moving them through the production area. And I'll use the old cliche. I know if any of you've heard me talk about this out in the industry, it's like an aircraft carrier, and we look at the deck of the aircraft carrier. There's a deck boss who's going to know where every single plane that's on that deck is and how they have to move them so that they don't have any mishaps on the deck. Well, it's kind of the same thing we're looking at here, just in a smaller scale. How are we going to be able to manage the vehicles through the store, and when can I bring another one in? So this is going to tell me, what's ready to go out, when will it be done, and when can I bring another vehicle into production. So the stall to tech ratio, this is where we see the bottlenecks occur. So we're trying to avoid those. So stall to tech ratio can control and help to ensure that maximum productivity can be reached. What we typically see here is the ratio is about 2.2 to 2.5 to 1. This allows maximum productivity on the vehicle. And what happens if I've got two and a half, well, really three cars that the tech's working on, it allows you roughly at 2.5 to 1 ratio, 3.2 hours touch time per day per car. And that's really a pretty good measure of what we want to get through the store. And then we've got to look at what's our booth consumption, which we'll see on the next slide, which tells us how many cars can we get through the booth. So we're trying to identify the rate at which the vehicles can proceed through the spray booth. So if you use the base calculation on a downdraft booth, we get 480 minutes that we would have looking at an 8-hour day. Then we divide that back by 90 minutes, which is the typical booth time that we would have for an end-to-end um, cycle in the booth. That gives us about 5.3 cars per day. Now, there are some materials you can use that can speed that up. We can add hours onto the day that will give us more vehicles through. But those are things that are all part of the considerations that we develop so that we can avoid bottlenecks into the booth. So we're looking at how many cars can we get in, how many cars can we get out. So what's a factor in this? If I know that I've got to get X amount of cars out per day, then I've got to calculate how many can I get through the booth. Now, what are some of the things that will help? And I know all the painters out there that listen to this will understand. I can get multiple parts into the booth and actually create multiple cycles during one cycle. So that's another way that we can manage our processes and get the vehicles through at a pace which will make the store money, which is ultimately the goal that we're looking for. So regulating the hours in production so that WIP work is cycled through the daily production activities, production management. We're looking at, and what do you do with that? Well, it depends on the amount of WIP that you have and what kind it is, but you try and look at least 30% of the hours that you have available into production per day. We should look at about 30% of those hours being available to work on WIP. That allows us to kind of speed up the process for which the vehicles will go through. Now it depends on what what they're being held up for. If it is work in process not being worked on, we've got to make sure that the things like contacting the insurance companies if that's the holdup, making sure that we're using whatever leverage we have to get the insurance companies to the store to make sure that their supplements are completed, making sure that supplement payments are made on time, and there's some leveraging that we can do with that. Those are the things that we have to look at here to help regulate the production management and on the production floor to make sure that we're pulling that WIP in and we're getting that cash flow back into the store. So some of the production dues, we want to schedule work so that it's able to be produced efficiently and completely. Be sure that the capacity matches the output. The technician count must match the necessary throughput requirements. So I need to have enough technicians to produce enough hours to make sure that I can reach the financial goals that I have for the store. So I'm going to set production targets which allow technicians to be productive without spreading them out among too many jobs um, that need to be completed. And what's the problem with that? I have a very good proficiency. They're working on lots of stuff, but I reduce my efficiency, which means I'm not getting those cars closed. I am going to say one thing when it comes to efficiency, though, that is really important that some folks forget. If you're looking at your management flagged hour report and you're looking at your management system that way, one of the things that we need to make sure we're looking at is how many hours those folks are working on WIP when we're looking at efficiency and making sure that those are calculated into their efficiency numbers for the week. If we don't do that, we may have a technician who really is producing very well, but then we call into question their production ability because we haven't calculated the WIP work into their production numbers because it's not a closed file, if you will. We're not counting those WIP numbers in, although we're paying them out in cost of goods labor. So some other things that go into this production process that we need to know about. 5S your store. um, 5Sing and making sure that it's clean, making sure that tools are well maintained, and our ability to use them is always there. Making sure that tools are being put away in a spot where they're supposed to be put away, and that they're ready for use. Doing things like making sure we're purging the gas. We make sure that the tips are good. Make sure, and on MIGs, making sure that everything is clean. On your spot welders, make sure everything is ready to go so that when the next person grabs that tool to use it and they roll it over, everything's ready to go. That's going to help everyone. So the 5S process is extremely important and something we should always try to do because it helps us maximize throughput. Some of the production don'ts are going to be, don't overschedule work. It results in vehicles sitting, and we want them to get into the store, but they're waiting to get into the store. And so then what do? We try and stick things in that aren't scheduled, and now we build bottlenecks in our processes. So we've got to be very aware that when we create the schedule, we make sure that we're following the schedule so that it allows us to maximize the capabilities of the store. Don't continue to assign work when technicians aren't meeting their efficiency requirements. If I have somebody that, I have them um, rated so that they'll produce 175% and they only produce 130 this week, do I want to continue to give them more work at that lower production level? Or maybe am I going to have a conversation with them about their productivity? Don't keep continuing to push more work on them when obviously there's a reason why they're not able to produce at the level. We've got to find out what that reason is. Make sure we address it with them individually. So there's where the communication comes in. Manage the production environment. Don't let the I need another job manage it for you. The technicians need to be told you'll get the next job as soon as the next job's ready for you. Even if they're waiting a few minutes for it, if they're at a 2.5 to 1 ratio, there are other things that they can be working on as well. Don't put so many cars on the production floor that time is lost in moving them or having to move them to get other things done. That is waste. As we're directing labor to be used on things that aren't producing production dollars, that is waste in our environment. We want to make sure that that's not being done because that costs the technician money and it costs the store money in that flat rate environment. So just be cautious that we're not putting so many cars on the floor that we can't maneuver around what we have efficiently, so that we can maximize our outputs really on all of those cars so that we can maximize profitability. So to create a quality system, we want to document your daily processes, create job descriptions, and communicate the responsibilities and expectations to your folks. We want to have measurements in place and meet with your staff to ensure compliance. That's really a key in here is share the information back with the folks. They're not wanting to do a bad job. They're wanting to do a good job. So anything we can do to support them in doing that better job, that's what we want to do. Complete quality control measurements. As we start looking at tightening up the repair environment and making sure things are going through fluid, we've got to look for quality control issues too. So if we have somebody that maybe isn't doing as well as they should, let's spend some time with them and get that corrected. We want to look at what do we do to develop our compliance processes. And then if we've got people that are doing very well, reward excellence. It doesn't have to be a big thing. The $10 gift card for coffee sometimes is just thank you enough where somebody appreciates it and they say, wow, at least I'm recognized. If you have a really high performer, that's maybe when you want to do something a little different for them. But that really is a case by case basis by both store and by tech. So, but that is something that we've got to be conscious that as we reward excellence, it seems to drive excellence. So, really important for us to continue to look at. So that's the end of our production basics. I'm sure we'll have more on production. It's a kind of an ongoing topic. This is your base level piece of it so that folks have a general understanding. I want to thank you for attending. And please don't forget to go into AMI and take your test. And we'll look forward to speaking with you next time.